and he kind of realizes that he's not allowed to leave, right? The doors are locked, he can't get in, and it's like mysterious, right? Like the mystery is right up fully there. And then he starts
Well, and he has to sleep in his bedroom. He's forbidden to sleep anywhere else, but he's like,
Yeah.
fuck that. And he goes to like sleep in the library. And then he gets approached by like 3 sexy vampire ladies.
Yeah, let's talk about the sexy
vampires must be sexy. They must be
yeah.
sexy, except for Dracula, who is entirely unsexy.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the not just like the sexiness of those 3 women that kind of like are trying to seduce him, which I found compelling. I think that was in chapter 3, around page 34 or so. But just this idea of like sexiness and like horror, like the correlation.
Yeah, but just the women. Right now,
just the women,
at least in this book, it's just the women.
Yeah,
the men are Dracula is not described as like a sex bomb. He is like a haggard old man, basically. I mean, they don't call him haggard, they just describe him as like, an old, really super creepy looking man with like a pointed beard and mustache, and you don't get the sense that he was like ever very attractive. So I found that kind of funny because there's so much emphasis on like the hotness of the vampire, even here, but just with the women, just the women.
Yeah, that I'm gonna go into this in our subscribers only episode when I talk about some of the movie adaptations of this novel. Whereas, like, there was a point where, like, they did start to make the male vampire or Dracula character more sexy, but that came later. Like, it's not so much in the novel. Although you could argue he collects women, right? Like, he collects these beautiful
there
young
is
women.
that part. There is a part later in the book where we learn that he is appearing younger than he once was.
Right, as he drinks blood,
right.
etc.
So, it's not... It's an idea left to be explored. But, like, all the women are hot.
And at this time, right, like the Victorian era was a very sexually repressive area, at least in terms of like the prim and proper stuff that they would publish, right? Obviously, people were still having sex and all that kind of stuff, but like there was...
Yes, there's a lot of, she looked at me very appealingly.
Right. Very, there was a lot of shame associated with it, those that know the history of that era, right? A lot of pearl clutching, a lot of fainting on couches. But like... I am fascinated by this question. I want to explore it a little bit, like the correlation between sex and horror, and even like sex and gore to a certain extent. There's not really gore in this novel.
There's some like taboo there, right? Like that's what, like the joining of those two things. I feel like there's something taboo about it that it plays into. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that there is a strong correlation between, well, because sex is such like a human experience, such a thing that I mean, you go back in religions, we treated it as sacred. There were celebrations, right? You could talk about Roman orgies, all that. There was this tied in thing. And then like, for some reason, it's tied into horror too. I'm fascinated by why, the kind of like this hideous thing, even like gore that's hard to look at or something, like you cringe on when you're watching a movie or something, and then like, but like the person's like naked, and like there's like some girl with like huge fake breasts like naked on the screen, and then like they're like cutting her toe off or something, and you're like, oh, it's hard to look at, like, but then like there's also like, it's like kind of, there's tits. Not that it's sexy, not that it's like, oh, appealing, but it is like there's something that carries the horror. And I was thinking this, biting, just the act of biting another person, like, right, something little kids do, but when you do it as an adult, why do you bite people? I mean, it's a sex thing, right? Like it's like, and then like the biting of the neck, right? Like this area, like the kind of, it's very vulnerable, sensitive, all that kind of stuff. The vulnerability that mixes in with sexual desires, the kind of illogical things that happen. I guess that just ties into horror. I mean, I don't know. I'm just attempting to kind of answer this thing that it kept recurring, especially as I was watching some of the movie adaptations.
Like, and it's also like, I think, playing into
sexy.
the idea of like evil being tempting.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I like that.
There's some of
I
that
like that
too.
idea. Yeah. Hell yeah. That's definitely there. Definitely there. Listeners can let us know what they think. The correlation between sex and horror. Sex. It is. I think this all the time too. I think about music, right? Sex and
It
music.
can
The
also just be
correlation.
sensational. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think that's what it's doing here. I think, like, you know, if we were to talk about something like American Horror Story, I think it would be somewhere in between. It's like unsettling and it's sensational.
Yeah, there's like a tantalizing aspect. Like it's like tantalizing you in a way that's uncomfortable,